Right, so hello everyone. Welcome to the WookieCast. We are here with Nick Tyrrell, and he works at Lucasfilm with Neil Scanlon as a prop maker and puppeteer, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
Uh,
creature maker, droid maker, yeah.
yes, and so thank you for sitting down with us today. Would you like
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about what you generally do on sets or with props?
Yeah, so my role is, as you said, I work for Neil Scanlon in Pinewood Studios in the UK, and we work on pretty much all the Star Wars projects that come through the sort of the UK from sort of Rise of Skywalker. I've been there since Rise of Skywalker, and yeah, we kind of do a bit of everything. My job is kind of do little bits of everything really. Most of the time, I'm either sort of painting or sort of designing these days, but I've kind of dabbled in lots of things really. I'm mostly based in the droid department, so we build the droids and we take them on set. Sometimes we puppeteer them, sometimes we don't. But yeah, it's quite an involved job. It constantly changes. There's always something new to do. It's you're kind of always doing something different every day. It's never the same, so it's yeah, very interesting.
Because there's so many droids in the Star Wars galaxy that each one of them has to be made, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So, how did you first get into Star Wars? Because I'm assuming you might have been a Star Wars fan before you started working for Lucasfilm. So,
Yeah, very much so. So I guess my sort of first introduction to Star Wars was probably back in sort of what, 1997, 1996 when the special edition came out. And I was given that on VHS. I remember vividly sitting down and watching Return of the Jedi first. I don't know why that was the first one I watched, but I watched Return of the Jedi. A very weird way to start Star Wars because you start finding out that someone's sister is in it, and yeah, it's a very weird introduction, but it got me hooked anyway, and I was kind of in it from then on, really. And then shortly after that, the prequels came out. So I was sort of I was probably about 9 when the prequels came out. So I was prime. I was the prime sort of I guess target for the prequels. So I'm of the prequel generation. So yeah, so I've just yeah, it's kind of some of my earliest memories, I guess, is Star Wars. So it's always kind of it's always kind of been there. So I kind of always knew I wanted to work on it.
were
So
you
I
of the
kind
age that you saw the prequels in theaters, probably?
I did, yes. I remember actually I went over to I'm obviously in the UK, but I came across to Florida at one point in 1999 when it came out. And I remember vividly going to the toy stores and the toy stores just being packed with episode one merchandise. And I remember we went to one of the cinemas over there, one of the big American cinemas, and we watched it, and that was yeah, quite an introduction and made quite an impression on me, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And now with Galaxy's Edge, it's very immersive, so to say.
Yeah, I've never actually been to Galaxy's Edge. I am desperate to go. It feels like a bit of a shame. I spend a lot of time on Star Wars sets, but I've never actually
Mm.
been to the kind of the accessible one. So yeah, I'm a little bit yeah, a little bit jealous I've not been to that yet.
I'm sure you'll make your way over there at some point, next time they have a celebration or something. But given you have been doing so much design work, there's probably a lot of characters that you haven't done design work for that you would love to. So if you could do design work for any one Star Wars character or creature, who would it be?
I don't know. I mean, I think I've not designed a creature yet. That's one of the things I'm quite sort of desperate to get my hands on. I'd love to be working with Neil and working in with creatures and droids all the time. It's really cool, but so far I've most of my stuff's been more like the hard edge modeling, sort of the droids and the sort of the odd helmet and things, but not a creature yet. So I quite like to that's probably the next thing. I don't really mind what kind of creature, whether it's a background creature or a hero creature. I'd love to just sort of I think to create a new race in Star Wars would be quite exciting.
Whoever created the Porgs, like how did you like?
That
I'm
was Jake Lunt. Jake Lunt designed the Porgs.
Yeah, to be able to create something like that, I'm sure would be amazing.
Yeah, something I think obviously you want something to you design or create to be kind
Be
of
on
really
screen.
iconic. So you kind of want it to people to sort of like grab hold of it and kind of love it like they do, like Star Wars fans do. So yeah, I think if I could create something that was yeah, it's like a if you could create like like an accepted Star Wars creature, I think that's probably my next goal.
So most recently, you've been working on The Acolyte. So when did you first start getting involved with that project? If you, because
So
it's
the Acolyte.
development.
So I started on the very beginning of the Acolyte, which would have been early early 22. Yeah, early 2022. We were already set up. Lucasfilm had already set us up, and we were actually doing a bit of work on Ahsoka at the time. We were building our team. We didn't do a lot of work on Ahsoka, but we were one of our things was we had to build Anthony Daniels' C-3PO costume for Ahsoka for the cameo he has in that. Spoilers if no one's not seen that. But yeah, so we were doing that, and then at the same time they said, "Can you start looking into the Acolyte and kind of looking at some of the characters and creatures that were coming up?" And one of the first ones was one of the first things that we Leslie wanted us to look at was Pip. The droid Pip was the first thing really. But yeah, that was probably early 2022 we started that process.
I mean, I did notice one thing on Pip. It has all those little stickers. Were any of those intended to be Easter eggs? Because they're all very detailed and just kind of hidden. You have to like pause at certain
Yeah.
seconds, to see them.
Yeah, so they were all so yeah, they were all for a while they were temporary. They were
Hmm.
I was never actually meant to design the stickers. That was going to go off to another team. But I think maybe the stickers I'd put on it were on it for such a long time, people just got kind of used to seeing them and they just became the ones. But yeah, they were kind of meant to be little homages to things within Star Wars, but also kind of I was looking at the character of Osha and kind of thinking what she would have gathered on her sort of travels. So she was obviously meant to be a mechanic, so she was designed to be this a character that is very technical and knows how to put ships together, and that's why she has Pip, and Pip is a tool that she uses. So a lot of the stickers on there, there's a Loth cat, which is I guess it's just a little. There's four main stickers on Pip. There's a little Loth cat, which was just a. I'm a big Rebels fan, and just a little bit of an homage to that in a way. Um, and and what's this on the front? There's a little symbol which was off of Luke's helmet in A New Hope, and Pablo Hidalgo came by at one point, and I sort of said to him, like, "Oh, by the way, I put this sticker on Pip. I couldn't find any. I couldn't find out what the meaning of this sticker was." And he was just like, "Yeah, it doesn't seem to have any meaning, so that can go on there." And the other one is there's a really kind of there's a bit of a niche deep cut on the back of Pip. There's a little tiny racetrack, and at the time I was actually playing the N64 pod racer game. If anyone remembers
Oh.
that from the, I was playing that kind of as we were designing. My Star Wars doesn't end at work for me. Sometimes it comes home as well. As you can see, it's here as well. Yeah, so I was playing the N64 PlayStation game, and there's a track on there called Ando Prime, which is one of the planets, and it was just a really fun track to play. And I thought, well, if Osha is a character that likes ships, maybe she would like pod racing. So that's how that kind of there's a little sticker on there. So it's a little racetrack with some checkerboard, and it says Ando Prime on it, in a kind of a new proto besh font that was designed by the graphics team. And yeah, so that's a very niche sticker, but yeah, it fills me with joy every time I see it because I just
I
remember
just had
playing.
to ask about that because some of us on Wikipedia, we noticed it, but it's so brief that you have to pause it and it's kind of hard to read on some points because, so
Yes.
figured I would ask. It's very cool.
No, there we go. Yeah, that's the probably the most niche one on is that one. Just because I was playing that game and I kind of thought it kind of I've always loved the pod racing, and I just thought, if she likes ships, she probably would like pod racing. So it was a way to put something I was sort of passionate about into the world, but also channel it through a character that it would make sense to have that.
And Pip, I mean, he can't talk, but he's really endearing when he interacts with her, and then he gets factory wiped, and it's very sad.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Did you have to do any mechanic syncing with how he changed mannerisms so drastically at that point? Or was
So
it like mostly the same?
that was mostly down to the puppeteering. So that was down to so Jack is there's a puppeteer called Jack Parker. He's a good friend of mine. He is the puppeteer for Pip. So it only took one operator to do Pip. Sometimes with stuff like BB-8, sometimes you have a couple of puppeteers, one that does the body and one that does the head. Whereas Pip is a contained thing. So that was Jack Parker was the puppeteer behind Pip, and he just that was just as Pip was getting wiped, he just made sure that he kind of toned down Pip's kind of cuteness and he wasn't so alert anymore. He was a bit more kind of I guess a bit more sort of robotic, a bit more kind of
Without that spark, I guess.
yeah, he didn't have the sort of little peppiness that he initially had. Because I think the Pip was Pip's movement, Jack said, was inspired by his newborn daughter. So we used a lot of cues that she would have on how Pip would move around and kind of look and how inquisitive he would be. And then so when Pip is wiped, I imagine that kind of goes out the window and he just kind of goes into sort of a very sort of robotic kind of movement for Pip.
A lot of sense. So the other main thing that you worked on for the Acolyte was the stranger's helmet, which we
Yes.
do see really early in the show, but we don't really quite know what it is and kind of see like a silhouette of it. And then later we see it in much more detail with the sinister smile. Um, so it's obviously a really delicate prop piece though. So how did you manage to not have it break during the process, or did you ever have to repair it because of all the stunt scenes? Like those are some pretty heavy
Yeah.
martial arts.
There was a lot of fighting, and that was definitely I definitely took that into consideration quite early into the process. I've been quite fortunate in my career. I've worked in a lot of costume departments. I've done some Marvel movies, and did the Robert Pattinson Batman movie, so I kind of have a fairly good knowledge on how sort of suits and things are built in sort of that sort of side of the industry and sort of costume. So taking on the stranger wasn't too bad because from my perspective, I only had to make the helmet, the costume, and the gauntlet were all done by the actual costume team. Um, we ended up doing the stranger because initially he was going to be a bit more creaturey. He was going to have a bit more of a creature aesthetic. He was always going to be a helmet, but it was going to kind of maybe appear a little bit more creaturey. So the costume team allowed us to sort of take it on. But in the making of it, I knew that because there was going to be so many stunts and he was going to be quite heavily used and things breaking on set cost time and money. So I made the conscious effort to make all of the helmets stunt helmets. So every helmet you see, there's no difference. They're all exactly the same. So they're all made of a soft urethane, so they have kind of a flex to them. And I got the stunts team to check it over and make sure that they were happy with how sort of safe it was in case an actor landed on their head or Manny was hitting the head with a lightsaber. Was it going to break and go in his eyes? And the rubber was incredibly strong, but allowed a flex to it as well. So knowing that sometimes on set, sometimes things don't get switched out when they need to be, or people go to give you something and they'll kind of drop it. Sometimes there's accidents do happen. So to kind of negate any of that, I made sure that I made all of the helmets stunt helmets, so they could all be used for various scenes
Just
without.
whenever. It's just the helmet. That
Yeah,
makes
it was
sense.
just the helmet. There was a couple variations. Like one of them had a much wider cut eye hole, which when they're getting into the really heavy fight sequences, that was used a lot more just because it allowed for a lot more sort of vision. Because the helmet has a very narrow. It was always meant
Yeah.
to be a sensory deprivation helmet, so it kind of blocks out a lot of the kind of a lot of his senses, so he's more in tune with the force. That was kind of always in the brief, even in the design process. So but yeah, there's one stunt helmet which I cut a much larger chunk out of. So either whether it was Lou or Manny who was doing the sword fight in, they had plenty of space and they weren't going to hit someone with a lightsaber.
Your point about the lightsabers is, I mean, I was watching an interview by Daphne Keane the other day. She said that she did break a few lightsabers, so I suppose it was certainly possible for a lightsaber to break during. But yeah, the attention to detail was really great. But your process from taking that initial from concept to reality, I'm assuming you started with like sketches and then started modeling it. It probably took quite a while to get from start to finish.
Yeah, it took there was the design process is the bit that always takes the longest, whether it's it was Pip or Frank. Sorry, Frank. If I say Frank, that was his code name. Like on set, the helmet was always referred to as Frank, because I think it was based on the Donnie Darko bunny with the kind of smile. So his sort of code name was so, but it's in my head that he's called Frank, so I can't get rid of that. To me, he will always be Frank, and I can't get rid of it. So if I say Frank, I do mean the stranger. But yeah, so the design process is the bit that normally takes the longest. It takes a little while to because you need to bounce around enough ideas to kind of make sure sometimes you've just got to put out things that are wrong to know what's right, and it's quite a fine balance of sort of going between the two. And Leslie, both Pip and Frank, Leslie was very passionate about, and I had many meetings with her, going through the sort of various designs and Frank especially. There was a lot of one of the main design considerations that Leslie was after was she was always after that smile. She knew that the helmet had to incorporate a smile in some way. So that was kind of probably one of the main things from the brief was that this helmet had to have a smile in it in some way and be kind of eerie or kind of creepy. And it was meant to invoke the point of like when a smile becomes it goes from being kind of nice to becoming kind of sinister. It was always meant to be kind of on that kind of cusp. But I guess my sort of goal with the Stranger's helmet was to try and make sure, knowing that this smile had to be incorporated into it, I wanted to make sure it was done in a way that wasn't because putting a smile on a helmet
It's a bit, it could seem forced if not done
it,
right.
it can seem forced and it can come across as cheesy. I'm hoping it didn't in the final result, but the my kind of intention was that the stranger's mask, he sort of built it in his cave, maybe with Plagueis, whoever. He's doing his thing, he sort of built it in a way, and he ended up the smile was more of an accident. My kind of head canon or intention was that he never intended to make a smile of on his helmet. It just happened. He put a breathing apparatus in it and sort of was welding and doing all of his stuff, and that's how it came out. It was never a. I think that narratively to me that made more sense than him going for a creepy smile. I guess the intimidation might be a factor, but I think the idea that he's done this and it just happens to look like a smile and maybe he liked it and maybe he kept it as opposed to him sort of actively going after a smile.
And it kind of matches his personality a bit as well. The kind of like slow, endearing, like I'm here for you, and then suddenly switching to the stark, you know,
Yes,
very
that's
black and
the
white. So those two things are things that you worked on for the Acolyte. Was there anything else that you worked on for that project, or anything that you'd like to call out that someone you're close with worked on that you thought was really cool?
I don't know. We were from the creatures and droids perspective on that. We were involved in quite a lot of fun things. From getting to do a Jedi Wookiee was quite fun. I had very limited involvement in that. I think I only did a tiny bit of painting on that. I wasn't really. I did a little bit of painting on his beads on his hair, so there wasn't a great deal of work on that from my perspective. But yeah, the team did a great job on that, and it's yeah, Basil was fun to do as well. That was a nice little creature to sort of have sort of yeah, getting to sort of especially the contrast when like sometimes we do lots of fittings obviously with the actors and things. So sometimes they kind of line up and there'll be like a day where you'll walk in and there'll be a Jedi Wookiee and then there'll be Basil and the contrast of heights and things is always really interesting and it kind of you kind of have to you got to kind of pinch yourself sometimes when you see like you're sat at your desk, but if you look down the hallway, you can see like a Jedi Wookiee. It's all a bit surreal. But yeah, those all those things were great. But yeah, we were kind of we were busy doing lots of stuff on a couple of other films and shows at the same time. So there was a lot going on at that time period. But yeah, I think I think there's yeah, I think those are probably the ones that we were just because they got a lot of screen time as well. We made a lot of creatures for the Acolyte, which didn't get a lot of screen time. A lot of the time they're just sort of background heads that we sort of make, but it's always nice when they're up front and center. And Basil, Pip, Frank, and Cal Naka are all quite front and center, so that was good for us, I think.
I most of my work on Wikipedia centered around the noodle shop aliens.
Oh, right.
And some like several friends and just studying the noodle shop aliens. So those were cool. That whole planet. But
Yeah, the noodle shop stuff was really. There's a couple characters in there that we did that you can barely see. There's a I don't know if he's in the final cut, but there's a little tiny creature that's a bit like a Doug, I guess, and he's tucked right in the back, and he's on like a bike pedaling the noodles going around. I don't know if you can see him, but he was a really wacky little creature that we made. But yeah, I don't know if you see him in the final thing. But sometimes that's the shame. We put a lot of work into creatures, and
and
they
then they're
just
just slightly out of frame.
yeah, they're out of frame, but you never know. They get all these things get approved, and then you sort of make them. But sometimes you go, that would have been nice if we just got a little close up on that. But that's just, I guess, the sort of vanity of working in
Until the
creatures.
visual guide comes out, and hopefully a few of your concept art pieces will be in the art book, possibly.
That's what I'm hoping. Yeah, I've never had my work in an art book before, so that would be surreal, I think. And yeah, I think that would be yeah. I mean, I have all the art books and I kind of pour through them, sort of admiring everybody else's work. So uh, yeah, to have my stuff in there would be that would be yeah, pretty wizard. I think that would complete it for me.
Um, so kind of well, a little bit backward from the Acolyte, but I am such a massive Andor fan. I was curious if you could pick out one thing that you really enjoyed working on for that project that you were involved in.
On Andor, yeah, Andor was fun. That was a very long job for me because I was it was kind of over COVID, so that was quite a long job. I was actually because Andor wasn't going to be very creature heavy, and there's obviously in the final thing there's not an overabundance of creatures in it. I was actually in props at that point, so I was actually in props and set deck, so doing lots of sort of various things from sort of bits of ships, lots of panels and ships. Blasters and all kinds of things. But one of the coolest things we got to do on Andor was Luthen's Gallery. When you get to Luthen's Gallery in Coruscant and all the kind of crazy stuff he has in there, and we had a message come along that sort of said, "Would anybody like to suggest anything that Luthen could have in his museum, his sort of gallery?" And yeah, my Star Wars nerdy brain kind of went wild. Yeah, so I suggested a load of things. There's a few things in that suggested got put forward, so and got made. So the the stones from Lothal, the father, the son, and the daughter, those sort of stones, they were built by a very talented prop maker called Holly Martin. But that was sort of a suggestion. Again, my love of Rebels came out there, and I managed to sort of slide that in. But one of the main things I did was I was making Mandalorian armor for myself at the time. And so I customized my own Mandalorian armor and I put it into the show as the Mandalorian armor that you see sort of front and center of Luthen's shop. So that was fun. I
You get to
loosely
take it home afterwards, I guess.
I didn't know, unfortunately, that's all. Once it's I molded it. So I had took my armor in, I molded it, and I cast out a set to give to the show. So they've got that's all their stuff.
And then you
But
have your own set that you were customizing at the time.
and I've got my own set that was customized at the time. But yeah, the idea was I just wanted to make sort of like a um I'm a big fan of the Mandalorian, hence I was making the armor for it. And I just thought would have been a nice touch because it was one of the next shows to come along after the Mandalorian. So it was nice to sort of have some of our stuff in there, have like a little nod to the Mandalorian in a way. So, but there was the Luthen's shop on Andor was a lot of fun. Like I did the Shankara stones and things tucked in the back. So there's a lot of lovely little Easter eggs sort of tucked in there, and that was and the Starkiller helmets. I was involved in those. Yeah, all the good stuff really. But then, fortunately, towards the end of Andor, just after we did all that, Creatures actually called me. Star Wars Creatures and Neil Scanlon called me and said, "Actually, would you like to come back? And we've got some more stuff to do." So I ended up getting to do both. But yeah, I'm glad I got to do that little bit in Luthen's shop because yeah, it was nice to. There's a couple of things that were suggested that never made the final cut. We were going to look at doing Revan's helmet. That would have been an interesting one.
Mm.
That would have, I don't know, that would have confused the. I don't know what that would have
Well,
done to the
Legends,
sort of.
although I suppose he has gotten recanonized very briefly.
Yeah,
So
his
it,
name his
yeah,
name is mentioned in I think it's in one of the visual dictionaries. His name is mentioned, and yeah, we did a helmet that was very similar to Revan's helmet, and unfortunately, it never made the final thing. But which is maybe for the best. If Luthen's trying to lay low, maybe him having
a
Darth
Sith
Revan's
helmet.
helmet might be a bit too far. But the Star Killer ones were a nice nod, and there's some lovely other stuff in there. Like the Gungan shield was a really cool little feature touching back to the Phantom Menace. But yeah, that was very good.
There's always so many Easter eggs. I mean, I'm not sure if you were involved in Kenobi, but they had that one wall on the safe house with all the names, and several of them were from Legends. So it was very interesting how
Yeah, I
Lucasfilm
was.
always puts those in.
Yeah, I was not involved. I wasn't involved in Kenobi. There's a couple of our creatures in there. So when we were doing Rise of Skywalker was a huge project for us. We did so much work. And at the end of Rise of Skywalker, a lot of our creatures got sent over to the States and sent over, and I believe there's a couple of teams out there that look after those. So there's quite a few creatures in the background. Some of them are actually quite front and center that are stuff that we made over here, and it's just so it was very surreal working on something on Rise of Skywalker, and then several years later, you're like, oh. now it's in Obi-Wan Kenobi. So that's quite weird. Sometimes you see your stuff pop up in something else. But yeah, that was Kenobi was all filmed in the States, so we didn't really, apart from our creatures that had already traveled over, yeah, we didn't get to do anything on that.
Sure. Do you have any upcoming projects that people should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I mean, we whilst we were doing stuff on Acolyte, we were doing Andor 2 at the same time. That's so Andor 2 when that comes out, that's going to be quite a ride. And Beetlejuice. Weirdly, we were doing Beetlejuice 2 at the same time. Very a very interesting contrast to
Star Wars
Star.
and then Beetlejuice.
Yeah, it made an already weird workshop and workspace even weirder to have like weird kind of Beetlejuice characters around and Star Wars characters. Yeah, it's yeah, very surreal. But yeah, those are coming up. So there'll be yeah, it's a few other projects that I'm kind of working on currently, but nothing that can be mentioned just yet.
All right. So thank you so much for sitting down with us. If people want to keep up with you and your work, where should they find you online?
Yeah, I guess most of the time I post most of my stuff on Instagram, NJ Tyrrell at Instagram. Most of my stuff's sort of on there. I'm not the most prolific poster. It's quite hard to find time to do it amongst other things. But yeah, I normally if I once a project's released, something like the Acolyte, I can kind of sometimes I'll share bits on there of what I'm doing, or if I'm building anything in my spare time, sometimes I post that up there. It's good if you like nerdy stuff. It's probably the place.
Wikipedia loves nerdy stuff. So,
Indeed.
all right. So thank you so much, and hope everyone enjoyed the interview.